Yeah, green.
Green one. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to have you with us today. And I was thinking as we were coming over about the title of this panel between right-wing militancy and military authoritarianism, and I was really thinking it should be your guide onto how to not give in to intimidation. And I hope that you find the presentations that are going to be given today as inspiring as I do. You know, giving a panel like this just a couple of years ago would probably have been about some obscure country, and we would have been interested in it because it happened somewhere else, and we wanted to know what was happening in other parts of the world. Unfortunately, the reality of it is that today most journalists are working under conditions of authoritarianism of one form or another, are facing various forms of intimidation, are under threat. And so the lessons to be learned here today and the experiences of our fellow panelists are really of critical importance to everyone who wants to speak truth to power. I'll begin at the far left of the panel, introduce Yavuz Baydar, who is the chief editor of Ahval, which is an independent news site on Turkey. Yavuz has been in exile since 2016. He is a veteran journalist, Shorenstein Fellow of 2014, and the co-founder of several independent sites. Following Yavuz is Maria Ressa, of course, the CEO and executive editor of Rappler from the Philippines, veteran journalist of over 30 years, many of those years with CNN as the bureau chief in Manila. Of course, we all know of Maria and the fight and the battle that she's had with the powers that be in the Philippines, and her recent arrest and release, and we'll be hearing more about that from her now. On my left, of course, is Zaffar Abbas, who is the chief editor of Dawn, Pakistan's most foremost and prestigious English language newspaper, also a veteran journalist, 16 years with the BBC, and again has a long history of dealing with threats that relate to the work that he's done in uncovering Islamic militants in his country. He is also a former WEF board member and the executive board member of IPI. Okay, well, those are the sort of the formal labels and introductions, but I'd like you to get to know our panelists a bit more. So I'll ask each one of them in a few minutes to talk a bit about what it is to be them, working as journalists and as editors and media managers within the context in which they are under threat, not just from the government, but also from militants and extreme right groups on the ground. So let's begin with you, Yavuz.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming here, joining us. All right, in a short time, I will try to describe the cage that we have been placed in for about, in an accelerated manner in the past 5 years. I would place the rupture point as the Gezi Park protests in 2013, mid-June, where whatever remained of the independence of the private media were tested really severely. Particularly the TV domain was under heavy pressure by then Prime Minister Erdogan himself, which proved to be very successful on behalf of him. He managed to interfere in person to the newsrooms and managed to combat the independent media reporting, etc., about those protests. And then he realized that the Turkish media was severely fractured across the ideological lines. Turkish media has always been squeezed between, I mean, just to say in the parenthesis, that between missionary, what I call missionary journalism, on behalf of, they always saw themselves as some sort of pioneer or lead force for certain ideology, Kemalism, Islamism, Gülenism, and leftist lines along party lines, etc. And the tutelage, regime of tutelage, tutelary regime under the general chief of staff, which controlled the newsrooms across the decades, there were always people on either payroll or voluntary basis from the secret services in almost each and every newsroom. Tradition, it has become a tradition, part of the culture of self-censorship, which existed for 6-7 decades from the foundation of the Republic. So this fragmentation on the sector has been very apparent. Erdogan, being the most cunning of politicians for a long time to come, realized this. And he also knew another thing, following Putin, that the TV as a traditional media domain, a venue, was key to control the opinion. And that's why he always gave highest priority to the editorial control of the TV rather than print press or online or radio, which is almost non-existent. From then on, from Gezi protests on, we saw a deterioration of the newsroom cultures, which turned more and more into what I call open-air prisons for journalists. They were seemingly free, but under the direct orders of the editors, who were appointed by the proprietors, who were nearly totally dependent on the central power in Ankara, by way of public tenders, etc. So this is the system, this is the ecosystem that we operated on. And there were few of us who saw what was coming, the tsunami that was coming. We just kept repeating the same thing over and over, that if it goes on like this, there won't be any media to speak of. And which proved to be true. This was foresight that unfortunately is the reality now, where the military tutelary regime is over, more or less, and it was replaced by another tutelary tool under Erdogan, which is the Directorate of Religious Affairs, very powerful, high-budget institution in the state, and the masses that really are fed on, I won't even call it anymore pro-government media, but sheer government media, which is about 93% of the entire media sector, according to IPI and Reporters Sans Frontières data that speak the same way. So this is the environment which led to even worse measures, such as Turkey being the champion of the jailer of journalists in the world. More than half of the jailed journalists in the world are in Turkey. The rest is a combination. But not only that, more than 190 institutions, media outlets from various sectors, from Kemalist, Gülenist sector, from leftist, Kurdish media, which I didn't mention, which was very important for the battle for democracy that we had for about 20 years now. They are non-existent at the moment. There is only one news agency left, which is Anatolian Agency, and that's a national, the state agency. The rest are closed down, shut down, and massive amount of firings and sackings that took place. And we speak about 5,000–6,000 of journalists out of maybe 17,000 in total. Press card holders are either swept aside or bending to the powers that be, or unemployed, going to the Aegean Sea to fish, or farming, or growing vegetables, etc. So this is the environment that I would describe. Then we can go further about the details.
Okay, moving on to Maria, and just commenting on Yavuz, sort of being able to see this happening around you and being powerless almost to be able to affect it and to change the trajectory that everyone seems to be on. We'll revisit that again. Maria.
It's the green box. The green box. Sorry. I think this may be the end, and we may be at the beginning, and this is the middle. That's kind of, I think for us in the Philippines, it's a battle that began 2.5 years ago in May 2016. the election of President Duterte, the use of technology, the campaign machinery then weaponized on social media. And what happened there is, what we've seen is this wave, like the rest of the world, a wave of populism that's led to more authoritarian style governments that is slowly, I think, leading to a dictatorship. And the environment that we're seeing and what we're marking and fighting every step of the way is this descent of a very robust democracy into tyranny. And you're seeing it first with the use of violence, a very brutal drug war that seeds fear. And then the examples, the treatment of specific examples for politicians. It's a senator who is the former head of the Commission on Human Rights, former Justice Secretary Laila de Lima. She was accused of being a drug lord. I mean, some kind of crazy accusations that has landed her in jail. She's been in prison now for 2 years. And her trial began just a little before her 2nd-year anniversary in prison. For journalists, whether for better or for worse, that's become me and Rappler. In about 14 months, we've had 11 cases filed against us by the government. So the weaponization of social media eroded the kind of credibility that we had built up. Rappler is a startup, but I've been a journalist for more than 30 years. I was Manila Bureau Chief and then Jakarta Bureau Chief for CNN. I came home, I headed the largest television network, the news group of that. And when we started Rappler, it really celebrated social media, right? It celebrated the empowerment and how we could use civic society to do it. So first, seed violence, fear, make examples, find examples of what happens when you fight back, when you demand accountability, that the Constitution still demands, right? So I think that's the key part that I want. I want us to realize that in every one of our countries, the constitutions, if you are in a democracy, hold on to that line, because the push to make new normals, and that's what we're seeing in the Philippines, the narrowing of freedoms, the new normals that people are getting used to, loses our rights. And then I guess finally, I'll just, when it went from ridiculous, because that's what I call the 11 charges against us. My only crime is to be a journalist, and maybe to talk a little too much. But, last Friday, and this was only last Friday, I'm just thinking. So last Friday, I flew home, landed in Manila. I was arrested right as soon as I stepped off the airplane. This was the seventh time I posted bail. I was put into this van with 7 police officers, 4 of them in full SWAT uniform, and it was so surreal. I looked around me and I thought, my gosh, I must be the worst criminal in the world. That's what journalists are today, by the way. And then I thought, okay, I posted bail. Monday at 9 a.m., another arrest warrant comes out, and I go back to post bail. On Wednesday, I went to my first arraignment of the 11 cases that we're facing. And in that arraignment, I was hoping, there are 3 judges there. So again, fingers crossed that I am appealing to the men and women in the Philippine judiciary to hold to the spirit of the Constitution, to hold to the spirit of the law. We are in transition. And I am ringing the alarm bells. We are in a moment of crisis when what we do matters. And it's not just a journalist calling to hold the line. It is Filipinos who are afraid, who want to make sure that we do not descend back to tyranny.
Okay, going back to the middle, I guess. Zaffar.
Thank you, Fatemah. Well, shortly before we stepped inside this room, I was just having a discussion with Fatemah, and I said it's quite amazing that here we are 4 journalists from 4 different countries and telling the same story. So this is what the state of journalism is in many of the developing countries. In Pakistan, there have been lots of ups and downs on the media landscape for the first 40, 45 years. Some of you may know, where there was complete control over the media. Whether there was a military rule or a civilian setup, there were severe restrictions on media freedoms. But that also created a campaign mechanism where the journalist unions became very strong, the trade unions supported the journalist union, and by 1985, we started to win cases in the courts, on the streets, forced politicians, and got a certain level of freedom. And it was amazing, and that is why the bulk of the journalists really, who come from the old school, know why freedom needs to be respected, because there is a history of a struggle over there. And the support for this kind of journalism or journalists, just to illustrate an example, that when I was attacked for the first time in 1991 by one of the armed militant groups, which had created terror in the city of Karachi, and there was hardly any journalism going on then, and their decision was, how dare he continues to report the way he is reporting. They attacked my apartment, beat the hell out of me, my brothers, and all those things. But what they didn't realize was, the very next day, there were hundreds of journalists out on the street, not just in Karachi, all over the country, protesting against this militant organization, which was also involved in political activities. And for days in and days out, there were protest demonstrations till such time that that group took a step back. That was a small victory. Again, in 1995, when an Islamist militant group attacked the BBC office in Islamabad, where my colleague Daniel Lack and I were working, and put a part of it on fire and probably destroyed everything over there. Again, hundreds of journalists out on the street demonstrating, protesting against it, to an extent that all the top leaders of that group were arrested at that point. But now what is happening is that over a period of time, it's not just the militant groups that are critical of the media or attacking media, killing journalists. The state authorities have stepped in where they don't want anything to be discussed about them or critical of them. A state has reached where they only want their narrative to be propagated, to be owned by all state institutions, the media, the society, and whoever tries to question that comes under attack, a physical attack or vicious campaigns through social media, the trolling system. And the irony is that they have managed to rope in quite a few journalists. They have created major social media platforms to malign journalists, whoever tries to be independent. And that is the irony of Pakistan's media story, that there was a time when, whether they were right-wing journalists, left-wing journalists, journalists who thought there is no right or left over there, everyone used to be united on one question: nobody is going to challenge media freedom in the country. I'm not sure if that is the case anymore. I'm not even sure that tomorrow, if somebody like me is attacked, whether there'll be a unity over there. Probably there'll be half of from our fraternity who'll say, probably he deserved that thing. And that is where the tragedy, I leave it over there, and then we can take the discussion forward, Fatemah, when there are questions.
Of course, coming from Egypt, I find all of this very strange and alien. So, as we watch this unfold and we see sort of these processes that seem to be happening in different parts of the world, almost like patterns evolving, let's sort of deconstruct that a bit. Before we enter the panel, Yavuz, you were talking about mafia tactics. Perhaps you could explain that a bit further.
Yes, I think it's quite clear that we are now already entered into the age of political mafia. The politics worldwide, as we know, as we have known, is now falling prey to mafia formats. All the leaders that we see in America or South or North, or in parts of Europe, in parts of Southeast of the globe, is really the way they talk, the way they treat any sort of dissent, or the way they negotiate with each other, the way they tweet to each other, the way they demonize the media. I mean, let's face it, in any environment, media is the one who stand up to power and should stand up to power. And the way they behave and alienate the media is that we see in the United States, starting in Brazil a little bit, and Hungary, Poland, severely, I mean, it's a grotesque example in Turkey, which is really far advanced, leading the way, and Philippines, Egypt, we know Russia, all of these countries. And if you picture the leaderships in those countries, you see really organized crime figures, really, but disguised as politicians to various levels, dosages, etc. This is the trend. This is the pattern now, which is like sweeping, like going viral on Earth. That's important. That is, I think, our real threat and real challenge. When we speak, if we speak the same language, more or less, here in this panel, I think that is what brings us together on this nasty common ground. That's what I'm trying to bring up, really. This is a new era, an ugly age that we have entered in.
Maria, if you could expand on that and also perhaps touch on the issue of social media as being used against journalists, that area where we expected that we would be able to have a platform for freedom of expression and independent journalism, how it's turned against the same actors.
I think I'll pick up also from what Yavuz said. So first, I think we've always known as journalists, right, that information is power. That's always been the kind of foundation of what our democracies was built on. When technology came in and brought social media, information is power. Our old world order, where the journalists were the gatekeepers, that was washed away, because journalists still do our jobs, but the distribution of the news has now transferred over to social media technology platforms. When that happened, when the distribution went there, if you think, in the Philippines, Facebook is extremely powerful. 97% of Filipinos who are on the internet are on Facebook. And Twitter, 7% maybe. But YouTube is also incredibly important, right? So when the gatekeepers became the tech guys, they decided that, because they were in the United States, they decided that freedom of speech over everything. And that was gamed by geopolitical powers. And I'll talk about Russia here a little bit, right? Freedom of speech was used to incite hate. So freedom of speech was used to stop freedom of speech, if that makes sense, right? When you're getting thrown 1,000,000 times, when you're being pounded 1,000,000 times, you shut up. That's what happened. And then the lies, exponential. A lie told 1,000,000 times is the truth. And we saw that when Russia did it, it was first against its citizens. Twitter was their favorite playground. Facebook came next. And that kind of, I think about that in terms of the Philippines as B to C, right? If government, so that tactic went into, I'm going to begin to call it the dictator's playbook, but the Mafia style of governance. Again, that sounds very familiar, and that's certainly what we're going through. Last night in the Philippines, President Duterte threatened to declare a revolutionary government and to jail his critics because his family's now being accused of wealth and connections to the drug syndicates. So then what happened once they exchanged these things, and we see it, where's China fit in? China, I think about more as B to B. And again, I'll use the Philippines as an example. China's video surveillance, which is incredible, actually very, very effective, is now, the Philippine government has cut a deal with China where it will take that and implement it in the Philippines. So again, as this shifts all around the world, I don't think we're alone, but if you take a look at the election of Duterte, it automatically changed geopolitical power balance in Southeast Asia. South China Sea, which is a flashpoint, now moved from being the Aquino administration had brought it to arbitration. Now President Duterte and the Duterte administration has decided to throw the win at the ICC, at The Hague, to throw it away, and we are essentially allowing China in. And that disturbs the entire, overturns the balance of power in our part of the world. So it is both at its people and global. I think that's why this time is incredibly important. And we journalists, we tend to think vertical silos: Turkey, Philippines, Pakistan. Facebook's takedown last week included the Philippines, including networks that were connected to, and including the personal account of the man who used to run Duterte's social media campaign. And in Pakistan, the takedown included Pakistani military, right? So you can see that the authorities have been able to weaponize social media far more than civil society.
Absolutely. You're spot on, Maria, on this. This is what the tragedy is. How the scene has changed in Pakistan is in the last, say, couple of decades, as we all know, dozens of journalists were killed in Pakistan, and the jury is still out whether they were killed by the militants or one of the many intelligence agencies just because they didn't like their journalism or the journalism of the organization they used to represent at that time. But in the last couple of years, the level of killings has gone down drastically. There are various explanations are given because the militants are on the run, because the situation has improved in the country. But many of us feel that, as Maria talked about weaponizing the social media and other actions taken by the authorities or even the militant organization, extremist organization, is that why go for killing journalists at all when the easy way out is to kill journalism? So rather than killing journalists, just kill journalism and there'll be no problem at all. And this has been the focus of all these state authorities, intelligence agencies, militant organizations. Just target journalism. Make sure nothing is reported, and it will be a normal situation from their point of view. And this is exactly what is happening in countries like Pakistan. It is having a direct psychological impact on journalists over there, especially my colleagues, as we try to resist all these pressures that are put on us. Many others have caved in. But even my colleagues on a daily basis ask me whether it's okay to write this line, whether this phrase is all right, whether we'll end up annoying another state authority, and there'll be another vicious attack on the social media, describing as probably agents of CIA or agents of Indian intelligence agencies, or start to question our patriotism. All these factors are there, and on a daily basis, when my colleagues who in the past had complete freedom to decide what to publish and what not to publish, constantly turn towards me, asking me questions, what to publish and what not to publish. That, in some ways, is the victory of the people who are trying to destroy journalism in Pakistan. So yes, don't kill journalists, just kill journalism, and that will be a success story.
And yet, journalists are attacked and killed, and this is, something which, at least globally, is on the rise. And when you think of the interaction between what starts online and then moves offline, and the fact that journalists have become easy to target because they're also well known, and their images are out there, how do we protect people who are on the ground and still working?
Yeah, Fatemah, you are absolutely right. Journalists are still being attacked and killed. I was talking yes, about the percentage of people who used to be attacked in the past. It has gone down. What they're doing now is, when I say they're killing journalism, is they have made independent journalism or journalists very vulnerable by this, using these social media platforms to question our patriotism, to question our independence, all these things. What they do, when day in and day out, Dawn is presented as an agent of the enemy. Dawn is presented as something which is not just critical of the government, but critical of the state. Nobody has the time to go into the details whether what is being propagated on the social media platform is true or not. What happens is they end up regarding, or many of them, regarding us as probably we must be doing something wrong or something against the state. Otherwise, why so many social media platforms will be saying the same thing? And when my colleagues go out on the street, there was a situation in the past when people used to proudly say, yes, I am a representative of Dawn from here. Now they think twice, look around who the people are at a function or at any public gathering, whether there'll be an adverse reaction or not. And that is very alarming. We are fighting back. There are many journalists in Pakistan. They may not be allowed by their owners or their editors to publish what they really want to publish, but they are on our side. They are regrouping, they are reorganizing the unions to raise these issues and to expose the authorities as well as militant organizations who are after independent journalism. And from my point of view, that is where the hope is.
It's relentless, isn't it?
May I add something there?
Yavuz, I was coming to you, but I also want to put to you the issue of security, because you're in exile now. You've been in exile for 2 years, and that's no longer a safeguard. I mean, you're still at risk. You put yourself out there, and as we saw this year with Jamal Khashoggi, you're no longer safe just because you've left national boundaries. So perhaps also if you could touch on that.
Sure. I would like to also help my colleagues Maria and Zaffar on what's next for them. And the next stage, which we are at the moment, well, some of us could leave the country. We are the lucky ones. I think we compose something like maybe 100, 150 journalists from various segments of the Turkish media, mainly online. And most of these journalists are now stationed or have found some sort of sanctuary in Germany and Berlin in particular, or Cologne. And that's where they are. Many of them are somewhat engaged in professional activity. This is one pattern that people like myself, we have the Ahval News Online, which is trilingual, and its proprietor has given us full 180% editorial independence, which we operate on and which we feel very lucky about. And my colleague Can Dündar is in Berlin. He's operating with a smaller group of people. I have about 18 sub-editors in 3 languages. And there are other outlets, such as the one in the Kurdish TV and online outlet in Cologne. And also there are various patches of Gülenist media, small online. And those are all trying to keep the sort of information inflow on output alive. And there is also another pattern, which might be helpful for Zaffar and Maria, is that thankfully BBC Turkish, BBC and Deutsche Welle Turkish, these sort of public broadcasters online have given possibilities to my colleagues who operate in Turkey, but also who are now on escape, on refuge outside. So this is another pattern that developed. So we call ourselves, some call it exile media, some call it diaspora media, and this is where we found ourselves in, and it's, I think, important. But the security dimension has become quite grave and important, because particularly in Germany, where you have, in Europe and overall, there are about 4 to 5 million Turkish citizens or people of Turkish origin or Kurdish origin, again, polarized mainly. Approximately 70% of the voters based in Germany, Netherlands, etc., are staunch Erdogan and AKP supporters, which makes environments like Germany or Netherlands quite nasty for independent journalists operating there. And some of my colleagues in Germany faced these verbal attacks, even some physical ones, death threats. I have a colleague in Paris where I live, whose name I shall not name, but he was targeted severely by social media, and they sent him where he lived, and pictures of the door and pictures of his window, saying that we are going to get you. And he's going very carefully about in the streets of Paris. Worse so in Germany, less so in UK, much less so I have some editors in Canada and in Washington, D.C. They feel more safe there. But the security is something that is in our backbone. It's sense of keeping secure, safe is in our backbone right now.
Maria, if you'd like to address the issue of security, and Yavuz was talking about options. So I mean, media and exile is one of them. What would you consider to be options that we can function under and work towards now?
For me, exile isn't. I hope it doesn't. I don't ever get to a point, because I think we can win this battle. I think this is a battle that we must win. So, safety. I think the first is we all have to recognize that social media warfare, information operations take a toll, especially when they're targeting journalists. So for us, maybe 2 years ago, when we realized, when we first did it's a propaganda series in mid-2016, we offered counseling to our social media team, to our reporters on the front line. Front line now being in the virtual world, right? This is psychological warfare. It is something that you go to sleep with, you wake up with it, and while you think you can handle it, to be called every animal. The attacks after our propaganda war series, I wrote 2 of the 3 stories there. I received 90 hate messages per hour. 90 hate messages per hour. The first 2 weeks, I didn't know what to do, but I went back over every single data point. I wanted to make sure everything was 100% accurate. We were careful to begin with. We took 3 months to do that series, right? So the first. The second is knowing when the attacks in the virtual world move into the real world. And that is extremely difficult. I've led teams through conflicts areas in Southeast Asia, in Pakistan, I was in Kashmir. This one is almost by feel and by context, which is something only journalists really do, but even then you don't know, and you'll only know you're wrong when you're wrong, and then there are already physical repercussions. So in our case, what we did is security, which adds to your cost. And then when an instance very recently when pro-Marcos, pro-Duterte supporters slipped through the 2 security levels that we had, got to our office, it tried to intimidate our team by live streaming, and the live stream of our office called people to come to the Rappler office to attack, to bomb, to behead. When Facebook saw this within, I think, well, it was almost 2 days, but I hope they get better at this, but that video was taken down. Of course, what do you do? That's still psychological warfare. So what did I do? I increased security again 6 times this time, which takes resources. We keep in touch with our people, and we put in place protocols. Here's the thing that I think is difficult. We have to talk about this like this is a new problem, because it is. It's a new threat. And even when we sent our team to psychological counseling, the counselors didn't really know what to do in the Philippines, right? So we asked DART to come in and help. But again, this is happening right now. So, and I don't think this is something journalists alone can fix. This is why I run and I do a lot of work with Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. It's extremely important that the new gatekeepers drain the swamp, and I look at it like terrorist attacks, right? Because these are. And then finally, the last one is, how do you survive, right? Because ordinarily, without any threats, our business models already essentially, punched through with holes. Advertising is dying. I think this part is something that we should be talking about. We talk about it a lot more, but we still bemoan an old world. This new world has some opportunities for us. Security is connected to our ability to make money, because much as we think, we can get help in the short term, I expect to win this, and I expect to continue running Rappler, and I want to make sure we can remain independent.
I actually think you will win this, Maria. Zaffar, if you could talk also on the security issue, you were talking about industry responses, and not just within Pakistan, but perhaps also beyond that, in securing journalists and in informing people of the threats that journalists face and finding responses for that. If you could talk to us a little bit about that as well.
Yes, sure. In different situations, we have to take different measures. Maria has talked about increasing security. What's been happening is that the cost of having security is so huge that there is only up to a point that you can expect your management to provide that kind of money. Of course, they talk about the need for security, and then they may not say no, but it remains a challenge. So you have to find other ways of saving your journalists, protecting your colleagues. In my case, for instance, the management knows what my position is, how important I am. So I move in a bulletproof vehicle. I've got armed security guards with me. But the same kind of thing cannot happen with district correspondents, who are the real foot soldiers for me. In remote areas, they are on the ground. They provide the information, the real-time information on which we base our stories on. But they are caught between the militants and the military over there in those tribal regions, in the province of Balochistan. You send a story, one day a member of the militant group will come knocking on your door. How dare you gave the military's version? The next day, somebody from one of the soldiers or the security force person will take away the correspondence saying, why the hell are you even talking about the existence of this militant group in our area? And there are districts where president of the press club has been killed, secretary has been killed, the press clubs in Balochistan have shut down, and it is a huge challenge. So we constantly work on that, whether time has come to relocate that district correspondent to a safer place, or ask that person not to file a story about the ongoing violence in that region, rather than send somebody from one of the major cities to go in that area, gather information, come back and write about that. There again comes a challenge, is that when it comes to these armed militant groups, they do not understand whether the story was filed by that poor district correspondent or was written in the newsroom in Karachi or Islamabad. For them, if it was published in Dawn, if it is on their website, this correspondent must have been involved in shaping that story. So even if that person is not writing that story or filing that story, that person remains very vulnerable. So where the strength comes from is constantly being on the watch, relocating those people, taking their advice very seriously, what to report, what not to report, when to change the dateline, when to change the byline, things like that, and then look towards international media organizations for support. And they maybe just mere statements for some people to say that they are concerned about what's happening in Pakistan or Philippines or Turkey, but it does have its own impact. It does matter when these concerns are raised. The authorities do not want to be named and shamed internationally. So my suggestion always to all my colleagues who work for international media organizations, human rights organizations, is that please do not think these are just small statements. keep issuing these statements, keep expressing these concerns, keep writing to the authorities in these countries, and they will feel the pressure that the international community is aware of what is going on in these countries. And someday, when we continue to fight what I keep telling my colleagues, it's a good fight, and we will continue to fight it, someday we are going to win.
I add something on the security, institutional security and precautions. Again, we are far advanced on this field, which I'm not proud to tell you about. But what happened was, and this is a warning signal to all of you, I mean, don't ever take and granted, oh, in our country nothing will happen. It will happen. Whatever may happen will happen. And in terms of security, institutional security, what happened was many of those critical media outlets as institutions were shut down, their entire archives were deleted. Newspapers like, for example, Taraf, which doesn't exist anymore, their archives are gone. All the columns, news art analysis, articles, editorials are gone. They were unconscious. Of course, they were not careful about it. They didn't expect it to go that far. This is a barbaric way of dealing with the memory of the sector, of our profession. Institutional memories are really, I mean, destroyed. I can mention at least 5 or 6 very important across the spectrum outlets, newspapers, whose memories are gone. And they lament it now when I talk to them, and I keep asking, they have no way of retrieving those informations. That's, I think, important lesson for particularly you, but also for the audience, if anyone is thinking about what may happen will happen.
That's actually brutal. All right, so we're coming to the end of our time, and I'd like you, before I open up to the floor, just to answer to this one thing, if you could just leave everyone here with what you think is the top thing they should be thinking about and considering your experiences. I mean, the fact that you continue to go back, you continue to put yourselves out there at risk within the context of these realities. Maria says we can win, and I think everyone is at this panel because we insist to win. So how do we do that? What do we leave everyone here with, to lead us in that direction? If we could just take one sentence from each of you before opening up to the floor. Yavuz, would you like to begin? Yes.
Yes, I can only mention what is important because if you know what's important for the health and keeping our sector alive and profession alive is media, journalism stands, rises, prevails, and flourishes on the basis of rule of law and independent judiciary. And this is the most important lesson that we learned in Turkey. If that starts crackling and starts falling down, collapsing, there's no way to protect not only journalists, but journalism per se. It's gone. Now in Turkey, with total collapse of rule of law, we have no way of returning. It seems irreversible. Of course, one should be optimistic, but also, one should be realistic. This is where we are. Far worse is that some of my colleagues are sentenced to aggravated lifetime sentences. Some of them are thrown into academicians, etc., etc. The international European judicial system, in the case of Turkey, has stopped working because these leaderships, these mafia politicians, in their mindset, such as the one in Azerbaijan or in Russia, in Turkey, they copy-paste each other, and they don't care about the verdicts that are coming from Strasbourg. So the European Court of Human Rights is overwhelmed by the complaints to, in case of Turkey, particularly dissenters, freedom of expression cases, and it has given up. In my opinion, it has given up. It keeps postponing these cases, and this has created huge amount of disbelief and discontent, pessimism in those who battle for democracy in Turkey. The European court system, European Treaty of Human Rights is under threat, not only from Turkey. If Turkey is part of that, but also imagine situation in Hungary, etc., etc. These leaders learn not to disrespect anything that happens. In case of, for example, let's say myself, I win the case. What is it, they say? How much does it cost? 100,000 euros? Okay, we pay. So this is how they get away. So this is the system that we have been pushed into.
Yes, the thing is, Fatemah, I mean, I have been in this profession for over 38 years now, and part of a campaign to establish democratic values for more than 40 years. So there is nothing else that I can do. This is what my profession is, my life is, and we'll continue to do this. And we have won quite a few battles in the past. There have been cases where hundreds of journalists have gone to jail, and we have come out successfully against press curbs imposed by military regimes, by civilian rulers over there. So this time also, I'm pretty confident. This is a very tough period, very rough stage where journalists are being openly, publicly being maligned and are being accused of involvement in anti-state activities. But so what? Yes, as long as a big chunk of people from the journalist fraternity believe that what the state authorities are doing is wrong, what the extremist organizations are trying to do is wrong, we have hope that this too will pass, and at some point we will win. Maybe it may take many more years, maybe there'll be more restrictions, more curbs, probably journalists being abducted, being forced to go into exile, as that may have happened. But we have to fight this war. There is no other option for us, and we will continue to do that.
I'm going to echo both of my colleagues here. This is a war. It is a war for truth. Truth leads to trust, right? This is a war we cannot lose in democracies, and that is why we keep fighting it. I think I'm going to add just three things. Death by 1,000 cuts. Because it is a war, we will not concede ground easily, and that is why I keep going back. That is why I keep getting arrested, because every single instance marks a point, but we won't give it up quickly, right? And each instance then wakes up your community. I think that's truly important, because fear and apathy is the enemy as much as authoritarian style leaders. The second, rule of law, well, yeah, law has been weaponized. An independent judiciary, it's been co-opted. We talk about the 3 C's: corrupt, coerce, co-opt. Corrupt, coerce, co-opt. That's what fuels the transition. How do we fight back? We shine the light. And I think this is something that, you know, in the Philippines, we're trying to get news groups together who fight for facts, who fight for truth, to come together and actually leave behind competitive tendencies, competition, and come together. And I think Zaffar has said this, I think we would be far weaker in our battle in the Philippines without the international media. So I thank you again, and the organizations that are working for independent journalists. I think this is a crucial time. If we don't fight this battle now, we will see the pendulum. So I've begun my career, and you were with BBC, I was with CNN. I began my career in 1986 when People Power sparked movements around the world towards democracy, and I watched Southeast Asia swing from authoritarian style one-man rulers to democracy. I just do not want to see the end of my career swing back.
Yes, the conventional wisdom is that Trump's declarations about the media in the US as being enemies of the people has rebounded and affected and reduced, sort of created an open license on journalists abroad. That is a conventional wisdom. I think it's true. There's a lot of truth to it. But do you have any observations extent on that idea and any nuances that those of us who argue that need to be aware of?
Maria, you spoke about digital attacks coming from internationally. I know that in the Philippines now, independent media is under attack from DDoSes linked to the government, linked also to China. But independent media has also sought help from a Swedish company to mitigate this and detect what's going on. Do you see more partnerships internationally with IT security companies, or do you see more hiring internally to bolster your security?
It's a great question. So what we've seen in the Philippines just in the last month or so is DDoS attacks. And it was Corium that actually came out, and they were able to trace the IP because the VPN that was used out of China was weak. And so they filed, last Friday, they filed cases against the 2 companies that are in the Philippines that are linked to China. Look, the problem is that the competency in these types, the new skills aren't there yet. And so that's one of the things we can do globally, is to kind of come together and look at these types of attacks. So that's one. But the other one of social media, this is coming from the home of democracy, right? The beacon of democracy. And to go to that question, the American social media platforms have the values of a democratic system. It's just that the system they created had unintended consequences, and I am pushing, and please help us. And the guys from Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, I mean, we can throw them all out. Help us, your system is weakening democracies. So we put pressure on that. That's the immediate short-term answer. And then we also need to push back in case of too much government censorship. And then I think the last one on Trump. Yes, absolutely. When the country that actually helps countries under attack, so put that kind of pressure, loses its way. When President Trump called CNN and the New York Times fake news, a week later, President Duterte called Rappler fake news. This is a playbook. I covered APEC in Vietnam, ASEAN in the Philippines. The Duterte, Trump, Putin, they really like each other, truly. And then so they share things. It is both personal and professional.
Unfortunately, our time is up. Please join me in thanking our panelists, not just for this panel, but for their courage in standing on the front lines for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.